Welcome back. Now, we're making good progress. We have the ability to equip a weapon, and we're changing our animations based on our character state. And we have this nice running animation. And by the way, if you don't like this running animation, you can always choose a different one from Mixamo. There's no rule that says you have to use this one. But the thing is, we have our animation blueprint, and it's already starting to get kind of complicated. It's not really spiraled out of control yet, but it could easily do so as we add more features. And so for that reason, we need to learn techniques to keep this orderly. Now, one of those techniques is the ability to have multiple animation blueprints to handle different things. For example, if we wanted our ground locomotion and our main states to be in their own animation blueprint, we could do that. And the main states could handle ground locomotion and jumping as they do here. So if we wanted to do that, we can make a new animation blueprint and put these state machines inside of it. Now, we have to keep in mind that these state machines use variables. Their transition rules are using ground speed, and our run state is using our character state variable, as well as our idle state. Now also it's using character state. So if we make an animation blueprint and simply copy these state machines into it, we have to figure out how is that animation blueprint going to get the values for those variables. Well, we'll do that in this video. So the first thing I'd like to do is go to Blueprints, Characters, and here's our ABP Echo animation blueprint. We can make a new animation blueprint for Echo. Let's do that. Let's right-click, go to Animation, and select Animation Blueprint, and choose Echo Skeleton, and click Create. And if we want this animation blueprint to be for the main states, we can call this ABP Echo underscore main states. And we can double click to open this, and here's our animation blueprint. It's pretty much empty. And what we can do here is go back to ABP Echo and copy these state machines. So I'm going to Control C to copy them and paste them right in to our ABP Echo main states. And now these state machines are here, and if we double click on them, we have all the stuff we had before. But notice something interesting. We have the character state variable here, but it's kind of colorless. It's like the ghost of a character state node. And that's because this is not actually a variable on this animation blueprint. We just copied this node right in. And if we click compile, we get warnings because the character state does not actually exist as a variable on this animation blueprint. So we need to make it a variable on this animation blueprint. And we can do so by right-clicking on it and selecting Create Variable Character State. And as soon as we do that, here in my blueprint under variables, we see that as a character state variable on this animation blueprint. Now, we're never actually setting it because this animation blueprint is not based on our C++ class /anim instance. It's just a fresh animation blueprint. So this character state value is never actually set. So that's something we have to keep in mind and take care of. Now, if we go back out to ground locomotion and into run, there's the character state again. But if we compile, there's no longer an error there because this actually does exist as a variable on this animation blueprint now. But that's not the only variable being used. As we can see, our viewport shows a compiler error. And down in the compiler results, it's showing us where the errors are. The next one says, could not find a variable named is falling. And it even gives us a link. And if we click on it, it takes us straight to that violation. We're trying to use is falling, which is not a variable here. So we can right click and create the variable is falling and compile and get rid of that error. And our next error is for ground speed. We can click that and see that we're trying to use ground speed, which doesn't exist here. We can right click, create a variable called ground speed, and compile. And that takes care of all of our compile errors here. So we now have this animation blueprint, and it has these ground locomotion state machines. Let's go back out to our anim graph, and we're caching these poses so we can use the cache pose main states for the output pose. So let's do that. We'll use cached pose main states and plug it into the output pose. So This is great, but we know that these variables are never set. So that's one issue. But the next thing is, how do we use this in our other animation blueprint, ABP Echo? Because now we don't need these animation state machines. We want to use ABP Echo main states. Here's how we do it. I'm going to move these state machines up out of the way, and I'm going to right click and type linked anim graph. Now we can get a linked anim graph node. And if we select linked anim graph, we have a node that looks like this. And if we select it, here in the details panel, we can choose an animation blueprint for this linked anim graph. So here in instance class, we can select ABP Echo main states. And now our node changes to say ABP Echo main states. And what gets returned from this is the pose plugged into the output pose node in ABP Echo main states right here. So that's how we can get another animation blueprint linked in to this blueprint. We're actually linking in its anim graph. Now there's an issue though. ABP Echo main states has 3 variables. It has character state, is falling, and ground speed. And these need to be set, right? We don't want to go through all the work that we did in ABP Echo by getting our try get pawn owner, casting to slash character, and then accessing those values. We don't want to do all that. There's an easier way. There's a way to bind those variables in our linked anim graph to values of variables here in ABP Echo. We do that by selecting our linked anim graph node, and over here we see exposable properties. And we have character state is falling and ground speed. Now the drop-downs next to them that say bind give us a couple of options. One option is to expose it as a pin, and then we could simply plug a value straight into it by, say, getting character state and hooking it up like that. That's one way. Another way is to take that value, click the drop-down here, and instead of exposing as pin, we can bind it directly to one of the values of our animation blueprint variables here in ABP Echo, such as character state. If we do that, now we see that it's bound to character state, and we don't even need to plug it in. We could do the same thing for is falling. We can bind it to our is falling variable here on ABP Echo, and we'll do the same thing for ground speed. We'll click the bind dropdown and select ground speed, and now those values will be set in this linked anim graph. Now we don't even need these animation state machines here. We can simply delete them, but before we do that, I'd still like to cache this pose from this linked anim graph into main states. So I'm going to hold Alt and left click to disconnect that pin, and I'm going to keep this here. I'm going to plug in my linked anim graph and cache it to main states here. And then I'll take these other state machines and simply delete them. Now, we shouldn't see any change in behavior. All those state machines now exist here in the other animation blueprint, ABP Echo main states. We have the ground locomotion, we have the anim graph where they're cached and passed into the output pose. So we've basically abstracted that behavior away into its own animation blueprint. And now this blueprint looks a little bit simpler. If we compile and press play, we'll see that we still have the normal behavior. We can pick up a weapon, and now we have the different running animation, and everything looks great. And we can do this with as many animation blueprints as we like. For example, down here before our output pose, we're doing all this stuff where we're actually taking our control rig, running our pose through it, and then using blend poses by bool, and only using the control rig if our ground speed is 0. We could abstract this all away into its own animation blueprint to handle IK. This is something that's commonly done. Now to do that, we can simply create a new animation blueprint. So let's do it. Let's right-click, Animation, Animation Blueprint, select the Echo skeleton, click Create, and call this ABP _ Echo IK. And we'll double-click ABP Echo IK, and we can add that control rig node here. Now this animation blueprint is a little bit different. You see, Our main states animation blueprint simply gets its pose data from animation sequence players. But ABP Echo IK needs a source pose to run through its control rig that we're going to paste into it. In other words, it needs this main states here. So just like ABP Echo main states, where we're setting values of variables here by binding them, and we saw that we could optionally just hook up a value as an input, we can also hook up a value as an input, which is a pose, such as what's coming off here from the main states. So I'll show you what I mean. First, I'm going to right-click and get a linked anim graph node. Now, I could do what I did before and select linked anim graph, but it also provides me an option to select a linked anim graph that's already bound to an animation blueprint, such as ABP Echo IK. If I select that, I now have a linked anim graph node, and its instance class is already set to ABP Echo IK. So that's great. And we know that we want our control rig and our blend poses by bool hooked in here. But we can't just take this cached pose and copy it and paste it over there. If we highlight all of these nodes, copy them, and come over to ABP Echo IK and paste them, then there'll be a problem because we're trying to use this cached pose, but it's not really defined in this animation blueprint. If we click compile, we're not going to really get anything meaningful. If I hook up blend poses by bool straight to the output pose, we get the error here. And there's really no way to right-click and make a variable of this. We actually need a real pose to plug into the control rig. So that's a problem. Now, isFalling and ground speed, however, can be made into variables. I'm going to right-click isFalling, create a variable, and right-click ground speed, create a variable, and compile. And those errors go away. But we still can't take care of these main states. We actually have to delete those from our animation blueprint. And we need a way to pass in a pose into this animation blueprint from ABP Echo here. So here's how we do it. We go back to ABP Echo, we right-click and type input pose, and we can get an input pose node. Now, if we compile this and we go back to ABP Echo and compile this, we have to right-click on ABP Echo IK and select refresh nodes. And now, after refreshing the node, we see the in pose. And we can actually rename this in pose. If we go to ABP Echo IK and select that in pose, we can change its name here. For example, we know that we need the main states pose. So we can change this to main states and compile and go back to ABP Echo. And there it is. It says main states. And we can hook in main states right in here. So we can plug in main states, and now that we don't need these nodes, we can disconnect from the output pose, move them out of the way, and simply run our main states through the ABP Echo IK linked anim graph like this. And back in ABP Echo IK, we can use that input pose that we're passing in. It's like a function input parameter. But the problem here is we also need to plug something into the false pose. We need main states to go into the control rig, but we also need main states to go into the false pose in the case that our ground speed is 0. So for that reason, we have to cache this into a cached pose. So we can drag off, type cached, and do a new save cached pose and call this simply main states. And we can use this cached pose in multiple areas. So we can say use cached pose main states and hook that up to the control rig. And we can copy our use cached pose main states and hook it into the false pose for blend poses by bool and compile. And now control rig and blend poses both have main states. And we're getting it from the input pose, which is being passed in from ABP Echo. We're passing in main states and running that main state right through ABP Echo IK. Now, ABP Echo IK does use isFalling and ground speed. These do need to be set, but we know how to do that. We can select ABP Echo IK and bind these variables to values of the variables on ABP Echo. So we can click the dropdown for isFalling and choose isFalling from ABP Echo. We can do the same thing for ground speed, click the dropdown and select ground speed, and now ABP Echo IK is being fed those variables from this animation blueprint. So if we compile and press play, we'll see that we still have our normal behavior. In fact, leg IK is also still working, which looks great. And we can grab a weapon, and we're changing our running animation. Everything still works great. The only difference is we're now running our pose through a linked anim graph instead of all these nodes here, which we can simply highlight and delete. And the cool thing is our ABP Echo is the animation blueprint that updates all of these variables, and these other animation blueprints that we're linking with a linked anim graph node will just receive those values from this animation blueprint. So we don't need to update them in these other animation blueprints. And now we can keep all this complex behavior for IK in its own animation blueprint. And all this other behavior for ground locomotion and the main states such as jumping is all in its own animation blueprint. And ABP Echo is nice and simple. We've abstracted all that functionality away into their own animation blueprints, and this is easier to read. And if we want to dig deeper into the main states or the IK, we can go look at those animation blueprints. And by the way, we can always open them by double-clicking the linked anim graph, and it'll open those animation blueprints. So I'm going to go ahead and close those out and close everything but ABP Echo. And now we have a nice, beautiful, simple animation blueprint. Awesome job. And the beauty of this is we can go into main states, and if we want to change our behavior here, say based on our character state, then we can either do that here, such as going into idle and run, adding more states here, changing the poses here based on different states. That's all easy to do, but we could also create more animation blueprints and use linked anim graphs here. So there's really no end to how we can organize and make these things orderly and pretty. So great job. We now have a nice animation blueprint, and we're ready to move on to more exciting things like attacking, swinging our sword, and equipping and unequipping our sword, and all sorts of cool things. So I hope you're looking forward to that. I'll see you in the next video.